I didn't understand at first that what was happening was abandonment. When you're a kid, you don't have that word. You just have circumstances. You have instructions. You have silence that stretches longer than it's supposed to. My parents told me they were going away, for a bit. They didn't give an exact date. They didn't frame it as something serious. They made it sound temporary, casual, like a favor I was doing by staying put and being good. They left money on the counter. Not much. Just enough that it felt deliberate rather than accidental. Enough to imply planning, but not care. They said they'd call. They didn't. The first few days felt strange but manageable. I told myself this was normal. That lots of kids were trusted to be alone. That this was proof they believed in me. I repeated that thought whenever the house felt too quiet or when I noticed the way daylight moved across the walls without anyone else there to see it. By the end of the first week, I stopped expecting the phone to ring. I learned quickly what mattered and what didn't. Food mattered. Locking doors mattered. Keeping the lights on mattered. School mattered, but only in the sense that it provided heat, structure, and witnesses that could confirm I still existed. What didn't matter were routines meant for children. Bedtimes. Balanced meals. Homework done neatly. None of that was survival critical, so it fell away. I ate whatever was easiest. Sometimes that meant cereal for dinner. Sometimes it meant nothing at all because going to the store felt scarier than being hungry. I learned how to make myself small in the house, how to move quietly, how to sleep lightly in case something went wrong. I became hyper-aware of sounds. Every creak meant danger. Every unfamiliar noise made my heart race. I slept with objects nearby that made me feel safer, even though I didn't know how I'd actually use them if something happened. The days blurred together. Weeks passed. I stopped counting after a while because counting made it worse. Counting implied an end point. It implied someone was supposed to come back. The thing people don't understand is that kids don't rebel in situations like that. They adapt. I became frighteningly capable. I learned how to problem solve without asking for help. I learned how to decide whether something was serious enough to panic over or whether it could be handled quietly. I learned how to suppress the part of me that wanted comfort, because there was no one to provide it. I didn't cry much. Crying wastes energy when no one is coming to help. By the time my parents finally returned, I had already adjusted to the idea that they might not. That's what shocked them the most. They walked into the house like heroes returning from a trip, laughing, talking over each other, carrying bags and stories. They froze when they saw me. Not because I looked hurt. But because I didn't look relieved. I didn't run to them. I didn't ask where they'd been. I didn't cry. I asked if they were staying. That question landed wrong. Suddenly, the tone changed. Suddenly, there were excuses. Emergencies. Things that came up. They talked fast, overlapping, as if speed could make it all seem reasonable. Then came the part one still struggled to understand. They were angry. Angry that I hadn't told anyone. Angry that I hadn't called relatives. Angry that I'd made them look bad by surviving quietly instead of creating a scene. They said they hadn't realized it was that long. They said they thought I'd be fine. They said, "You're so independent." That word again. Independent. As if it were a compliment instead of evidence. I watched them look around the house, noticing things for the first time. The empty fridge. The mess I hadn't bothered cleaning. The way I flinched when they raised their voices. They asked questions that sounded like concern but felt like interrogation. Did you eat? Did you go to school? Why didn't you say anything? I didn't have an answer they liked. Because the truth was simple and unacceptable, I didn't say anything because I didn't think it mattered. That realization terrified them more than any accusation could have. They wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding. A one-time mistake. But I could see it in their faces, the discomfort of realizing that their absence hadn't destroyed me. It had changed me. They tried to resume parenting as if nothing had happened. Rules reappeared. Expectations returned. They wanted obedience from someone who had learned to live without oversight. We clashed constantly after that. They couldn't understand why I didn't trust them. Why I didn't ask for help. Why I seemed distant. From my perspective, they were strangers who had walked back into a life I'd rebuilt without them. As an adult, I understand now that their shock wasn't about my suffering. It was about their self-image. They had left a child alone for weeks and expected guilt, desperation, collapse. When they found competence instead, it forced them to confront something ugly. Neglect doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a kid who stops needing you. That's harder to forgive. I didn't come out of that experience proud or empowered. I came out tired. Wired for self-reliance in a way that made closeness feel unsafe. I learned that needing people was risky, that silence was safer than asking. It took years to unlearn the belief that being okay meant being alone. Even now, when things get hard, my instinct isn't to reach out. It's to disappear into problem-solving mode, to become that quiet child again who knew how to survive without witnesses. People praise that trait. They shouldn't. Because surviving abandonment isn't strength. It's adaptation to something that should never have happened. My parents still tell the story differently. They talk about a miscommunication. They laugh about how capable I was. I don't correct them anymore. I just remember standing in that house alone, realizing day after day that no one was coming. And how that realization didn't break me. It rewired me. That's the part they never want to talk about. The weeks after their return were the hardest. Not because I needed their help, I didn't, but because they acted as if nothing had happened. They wanted normalcy restored immediately, ignoring the fact that normalcy had been redefined without them. I had created a life during their absence, small routines that kept me afloat, making meals, doing laundry, keeping track of schoolwork, even pacing myself so I wouldn't break under the weight of silence. Now they barged in, trying to reassert control over a life they had abandoned, and it felt alien. I remember the first night after they got back. My father tried to help me with homework, reaching across the table with his hand on mine, smiling like nothing had changed. I recoiled. That simple touch felt intrusive, like an invasion of the boundaries I'd built for my own survival. I didn't tell him why, because I didn't have the words, and besides, he wouldn't understand. Not then. Not ever, really. My mother hovered, fussing over meals, cleaning, asking questions she had no right to ask. "Did you eat?" she asked for the 10th time that day. "Are you warm enough?" Her tone was worried, but I could hear the undertone of fear that her absence might have caused irreparable damage. The irony of it made me bitter. The damage, if it existed, had happened, but it wasn't to me, it was to the illusion they carried of being good parents. And now they were forced to confront the fact that their fantasy of parenting didn't match reality. I began to withdraw even more. I went to my room, sat on the floor, and counted days, not in expectation of their return, but in defiance of the fact that they'd ever left. I remembered every single meal skipped, every night spent listening to the wind outside and wondering if anyone would ever come back. I remembered how I'd slept curled up on the couch, blanket pulled over my head, pretending the world was intact even as it wasn't. And I remembered the fear that had followed me into adulthood, that people you trust can vanish without notice and act as though it never happened. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about understanding what abandonment teaches a child. That the world is not safe, that people are unreliable, that love is conditional, that independence is the only surety. That lesson came with a cost. It rewired the way I approached relationships, authority, and trust. Every act of care, every gesture of concern, I now measured against the possibility of disappearance. Every smile came with a question: is this real, or is it just for show? Months passed. I learned to nod, to smile, to respond with a veneer of civility while keeping my emotional distance. My parents tried to mend, but I was no longer the same child they had left behind. Their attempts at bonding, though sincere on the surface, were clumsy, riddled with assumptions about what I needed. They hadn't realized that the real damage wasn't visible, it was internal, quietly shaping the architecture of my mind, laying bricks of hypervigilance, independence, and mistrust. Looking back now, I understand why their shock was so acute. They had expected me to break. They expected tears, calls for help, panic. Instead, they found a child who had adapted, who had survived, who had built resilience at the cost of innocence. That survival, they realized too late, was not proof of strength, it was proof of what neglect creates. And that realization hit them harder than any punishment could have. Not because they felt guilty, they did, but because they couldn't fully repair what had been done. I forgave them in the abstract sense, not because the past could be changed, but because holding on to anger would only tether me to the version of myself that had been abandoned. Forgiveness became a tool for survival, a way to reclaim the parts of me that weren't shaped by absence. Yet even forgiveness couldn't erase the truth, that childhood is not meant to be lived in fear, in waiting, in silence. And that some lessons learned in solitude cannot be fully unlearned. As an adult, I see the echo of those weeks in every instinct I have. I see it in how I prepare for emergencies that never come. I see it in how I hesitate before trusting others fully. I see it in the careful boundaries I set, in the independence I cling to like a shield. Those weeks of being left alone taught me more about life, fear, and survival than anyone should ever know at 11 years old. And yet, I survived. I endured. And I am here. The final truth is simple, but it took a long time to accept. My parents' absence didn't define my worth. It defined my resilience. It shaped the adult I became, not the child they wanted, not the obedient one they imagined, but a person who learned to exist, fully, even in the absence of care. And that, in its own difficult way, is a triumph. One that I quietly carry with me every day.